Dr. Powers. Here. Ms. Lohr. Present. Mr. Irwin.
Here.
Mrs. Killian. Present. And Rosemary Scott. Ms. Scott. Here. All right.
You almost called me Rosemary.
I don't know if I make that.
Yeah.
I've got a pretty good record.
Our vision and mission statement. Working together with our community, we inspire our students to discover their talents and rise to their greatest potential. Our mission is building on the strengths of our diverse community. We create an engaging, comprehensive educational environment that supports the growth of lifelong learners. And we're going to turn it over to Dr. Bogdanovich and Dr. Megan Kirk for a presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent Hayward, President Killian, members of the school boards of trustees, Deputy Superintendent Goller. I always wanted to throw that in. Dr. Kirk and I are here tonight to talk to you about a topic that's very important to the school corporation, and Dr. Hayward asked us to present. What we're doing in our school corporation, I think, is cutting edge at this point in time. And so much so that the Indiana Department of Education, for their yearly school safety workshop, invited us to present on what we're going to present to you this evening. To the right of me is Dr. Kirk. I don't know if many of you know Dr. Kirk, but I have the pleasure of working with her every single day, and she is beyond brilliant, and I'm just very fortunate and blessed to be working with her and sharing her ideas, many of which that you'll see today spawned from conversations that her and I have had along the way. It takes a lot of time and energy to make sure students are safe, but it's one of the most important jobs that we have, and that job has changed over the past 5 years, over the past 2 years, over the past 18 months, and will continue to change, and we have to evolve with that change. And as you see today, we have evolved, we have changed, we have pivoted, and you have to pivot in this job. So we'd like to just share with you some various elements of, I thought it would be changing on my computer. So we have a presentation for you, and we'd like to first start off. This is what we'll be covering this evening: bullying, Chromebook monitoring, crisis assessments, DCS reporting, handle with care, school-based mental health services, and some staff professional development. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kirk, and she's going to...
All right, good evening. All right, so when we talk about bullying, we're really talking about keeping our students safe, and we want them to have an outlet to report instances in which they feel like they've been bullied. So we've got a few different avenues for them to report. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Stop It. And then I'm also going to share about the Cogmedo training that allowed staff to participate in some simulation training. And then we'll talk about some Google Forms that we've also created for our students and staff. With Stop It, this online anonymous reporting app was loaded onto the Chromebooks of our secondary students back in September. And we loaded it onto our elementary Chromebooks this past January. Every staff and student Chromebook has this form on their Chromebook. They can click this button and it will generate the form, and they can fill it out, and it goes directly to the administrators in that building for them to respond in a timely manner. It also allows them to communicate anonymously with an administrator in the building. There's a messenger app or a messenger feature inside the app, so they can communicate. We had an incident last night, and I was able to do just that with a student. She was feeling some concerns. I popped into the chat with her, made her feel a little more comfortable with waiting to talk to her school counselor today. So they're utilizing this platform as a way to share their concerns. We've had 238 reports made. That was as of Friday. We had some over the weekend, so that number has grown. When I broke down the top 3 incident types, bullying and cyberbullying is our most reported incident on this app. We do have students that also report instances of abuse and also vandalism within our schools. So again, the reports that some of these students are making through this app have allowed us to take action in order to keep our buildings safe for all students. So we've been really pleased with this application for our students, and it's really done a nice job.
Dr. Kirk, when you said click on a button, is that like on my screen?
It's on the taskbar at the bottom. There's a little S right in the middle.
So every Chromebook, we've loaded several things on Chromebooks, all 14,000 of them, Stop It being one of them. We want to make this extremely accessible to students. And you'll see with our bully reporting form, we've made it extremely accessible to students. And throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask questions like Dr. Hayworth did.
Only because he did it first, I'll.
I was actually planning.
So, not that you hadn't noticed it on your own Chromebook. So when you say actions have been taken, what types of actions have been taken as a result of the reporting?
Yeah, so when we get a report, a Stop It report, we'll send it to the school. We get it, we follow up with the school to be sure that action has been taken. You know, it just depends. There's a wide variety of things reported. For example, Dr. Kirk had mentioned vandalism. So when we had the TikTok challenge things going on, we had just come on board with our Stop It app, and it was really truly remarkable the number of students that made anonymous reports about who they thought were vandalizing bathrooms. So we were able to follow up. You know, if it's a case of abuse or neglect, we try to report on that if it's actionable. Since it's anonymous, sometimes we don't have a name, so it's harder to report something like that. A bullying investigation would and should commence if we hear about the bullying. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. I hope that answers your question, Dr. Palmer.
So the students understand, I mean, when you say it's anonymous, it's no IP address is associated with it, no MAC address in a particular computer, so there's.
That is absolutely correct. And in fact, the first report that we ever had, something we wanted to know and we couldn't find out. So and that's a little bit nerve-wracking, I'll be honest with you. But it truly is anonymous. And but the chat feature that Dr. Kirk was talking about is truly amazing. Now remember, last night was Sunday night, and Dr. Kirk was on there chatting with a student about a problem that student was having, and was able to go back and forth, which is probably pretty comforting to a student to be able to have that dialogue in real time with someone. And hopefully we got down to the bottom of that one today. But it has really taken off. As Dr. Kirk said, we launched it earlier in the secondary schools, then later in the elementary schools. We just had some issues with the app for elementary that we weren't comfortable with, but we made those changes.
So bullying reports before, bullying reports after, dramatic increase, decrease?
Yeah, so as we get into that, the bully reporting also has an icon, and we've seen a dramatic increase in reports, bully reporting, since we put that icon on there. I think double the number we saw in the first 5 months in the last 3 weeks. So let's say we had 60 in the first 5 months. Since we put the app on our Chromebook, it's a different app. It goes to Google Form that Dr. Kirk created. We've seen 50 reports in the past 3 weeks. So that's a good thing. I always say that bullying reports and investigations, not like golf, low score doesn't win. We want to see investigations from reports. It's very, very important. Oftentimes we get phone calls from parents that are frustrated and say, my child's being bullied, you're doing nothing about it. We want to be sure that we can prove that we have investigated
So if it's anonymous, let's see, well, if it's anonymous, they have a choice of a chat, to go to the chat room with you, and through conversation, they feel more comfortable in identifying themselves, so you can alert the counselors or whatever. The same way with the bullying and the abuse, which I'm assuming takes place outside of the classroom, because we are by law have to report that. So that again, they have to get into the chat room to really identify who they are.
For some kids, yes. I would say maybe probably 2/3 of the reports we get, students are including their name, because there's a section on there that says who's at risk, who is this affecting. And I would say most of our kids are putting their names there, so we know who to follow up with. When they don't, we do utilize that chat feature to ask for more information. Sometimes they respond and sometimes they don't. We can only investigate as much with the information that we have. But the chat feature has been useful for our students, and when we shared about the app and the training that the students went through, we shared that Messenger app was a feature, and it was one way to communicate with their counselor or their dean or the principal within their building, whoever was on that team, to respond to that alert. And so, you know, the case from last night, the counselor was able to go in today to that alert and start talking with that student. She still hadn't declared who she was, although the school, I think, had a pretty good idea. The student hadn't shared her identity at that point, but she was definitely processing with her counselor today, utilizing that app. So, yeah. Any other questions about Stop It? Okay. So Cogmedo is a role-play simulation training that was utilized for our staff to participate in. Last week I participated in a call with a representative from Cogmedo to get some feedback about how our staff responded to the training, what their feedback was, comparing some pre and post survey results. And there really was a strong increase in ability for our staff members to identify signs of psychological distress within our students, using some evidence-based communication skills, and then just feeling more comfortable in how to make a referral. If a student was in distress, what are those steps that they need to take to initiate an assessment in the school with the school counselor. And so I was really happy with the feedback we got about that simulation training, where they have to really take a role in what they're learning and responding to students that are facing any kind of distress.
Educator preparedness, is that just for teachers?
I believe this one was.
Yeah, that particular one was. Yeah.
Just for teachers.
So do we have any Cogmedo or anything similar that goes to like the EAs?
Yeah, through Safe Schools, Mr. Cox sends those out, those trainings through our Safe Schools program.
Okay, so our administrators alerted to the role play simulations?
I don't know if they've had that yet, Mrs. Lauer. We'll have to check on that one for you. I don't know if they've had that training through the Cogmedo. We'll have to look at it.
With evidence that Cogmedo has worked.
think our increase, and I'll talk about the crisis assessments we've seen in the school, I feel that since we implemented Cogmedo and we have utilized our youth mental health first aid training with our teachers, we've seen an increase in referrals, and I think part of that's due to the education from these programs. So I think our teachers are more comfortable in making the referrals to the school counselors. So not maybe quantifiable evidence, but I think anecdotally I would say that those increases in referrals that we're getting are because staff have been exposed to these kinds of trainings.
It'd be interesting to see if there's also mental health of the teachers, that they're making the right choice for referral as well, and make sure they're not, the stress of, am I going someplace I shouldn't be going, am I doing the right thing, am I not doing the right thing, am I said the right thing, that might also be different just with staff members as well.
I'm curious, I'm not sure if this is a follow-up to that question, but what happens if a student is identified as needing a referral and gets kind of put into the start of this system, but it's maybe a mistake, and that student is really not in need of those services? What would happen to make sure, I mean, what happens to that student?
A referral like for being in crisis or for,
Yeah, just if like there's a mistake that's made, and like there's a student who might not need those extra services, is there a way to flag that, or there, like, what's the, I guess, checks
so,
to make sure that we got the right student in the right service?
yeah, so hopefully this will, if I'm understanding correctly. So when we have a student that's in crisis, the school counselor does a screening with them. And so we make sure, we kind of look at the data from that. So if they're reporting in that moment that they're in crisis, we give them ratings like low, moderate, high risk in that moment. And from there, we make referrals out for mental health services. So that's usually kind of our checkpoint there. If a student was referred by a teacher, you know, Johnny has made a couple comments, I think he might be depressed, would you mind talking to him? May not generate an immediate referral for a crisis assessment, but it might generate a referral for a school-based therapy session with one of our providers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we kind of tease it out through our school counselors. They're kind of our gatekeepers on whether or not to move forward with those. For some students that maybe get started in the process of school-based counseling, and whether they want to continue with it or they don't. Again, the school counselor is kind of that gatekeeper with the student, but also our mental health providers, in making sure that they're getting what they need. And if the provider isn't able to meet their needs, we might connect them with another resource if needed.
And we do work with a parent in that situation too, and get them involved. It's very important to hear their perspective on their child, and so we'll pull them in if they're available, if they're accessible at that point. Moving on to bullying incident forms, and Dr. Hayworth brought this up, but I'll just review it again. We launched this in January of this year, of having the icon on the Chromebook, and just a sheer increase in the number of reports tells us that it's being effective at this point in time. Sorry, I'm changing it on mine, but I'm not changing it there.
I'll help you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So this is just an important aspect, and one of the things that we did is work with Dr. Cobb from Covered Bridge, and we provided training just recently to every administrator, which includes every principal, athletic director, and then they just trained the trainer, and then they went back and provided that for their entire staff, and that's just on bullying reporting and investigation. We're looking at the law of bullying, and we canvassed that very, very well and in depth, because the law is, I wouldn't say it can be complicated, but it's intricate in its own little way. And so we wanted to explain that to all of our staff members throughout the county. And then, in doing so, we also wanted to put that in perspective of the board has a policy concerning bullying, and we wanted to frame bullying investigations in that regard also. And plus, our student code of conduct also has rules written in there about bullying. So we really had a lot to clarify and to standardize with our entire staff, and we did that. We felt it was very successful. I think it was well received too. And in conjunction with that, we started the bully investigation little icon on each Chromebook, and that again has been well received, along with a shortcut on administrator's computer for the bully investigation form, which is equally important. You know, we tell our administrators if there is a bullying report, then there needs to be a bullying investigation filled out. Board policy states that in order to initiate a bullying investigation, it has to be in writing. You can make it verbally, but according to board policy, ultimately it has to be in writing. And that's why we initiated that icon on every Chromebook, because then anybody can report it, plus it's on our website. So again, very moving in the right direction for sure. I don't know what other school corporations are doing, but I can say that that was a huge step for us to do that.
This may be a follow-up to Amy. How am I screened out? You know, we all get emails of children who are being bullied. And we know that some of those are probably real, and some of those may not be bullying, maybe something that's happened in the building. So kind of mirroring what Amy has said, how do you get those screened out? This isn't really bullying, this is a fight between two students.
That's a great question, and that comes down to that law piece that I talked about, because that the law is very specific about bullying and what constitutes it and what doesn't. So oftentimes we'll investigate that and we will say it's not conclusive that there's bullying. That doesn't mean and that's the end of the issue. It'll be kept on the front burner for that administrator, and if it comes back, because the nature of bullying, not to get into the weeds here with it, but it has to be repetitive in nature, and that is deeply rooted in the law for the state. And so there's no such thing as a one-time bully according to the law. It could be something else that it falls under one of our other school rules. So it may not fall under the bullying rule, but it may fall under harassment or unwanted touching or something like that, or something of those natures. So I think our administrators now are fully aware of all three pieces there, because they have to have those three pieces in order to constitute bullying. So I feel like we will screen them out, but we still document them in our system that they were investigated. That's very important. We just don't document those cases that were substantiated. We also document the unsubstantiated cases in our notes section of Skyward. So I feel very, very confident where we are right now. So the next subject we want to talk about is Chromebook monitoring. Was I going to start this one? Okay. So Chromebook monitoring is something that we started back in April 2021. Remember, we had the 5-year plan for Chromebooks that was initiated in 5 months. And that was quite incredible. So we had a lot of catching up to do. There's a huge difference, and I'll really emphasize that. There's a huge difference between filtering Chromebooks and monitoring Chromebooks. And by law, We have to filter what's on a Chromebook or any device in a school. We have to do that. What's not so clear is what we have to do as we filter it. And as we receive these Chromebooks, we started seeing things more and more that concerned us on items that students were looking up or things that they were saying on the Chromebooks. Because every Chromebook that we have, and I hope parents are listening and students, every keystroke on that Chromebook, we know every keystroke. It's recorded. And so as they are filtered, sometimes an alert will come to us. And currently we use the company called Linespeed. And Linespeed does both things. It filters and it monitors. So as those alerts come to us, then we look into those alerts. And so we started this, and this has also evolved as we receive these Chromebooks. I don't know when Chromebooks fully became operational, probably somewhere at the beginning of 2021. I think most of our students had them. But we decided to start this team, and we have a team of people. There's a team of 8 of us, and that team works with Lightspeed, and we get these alerts via email, and the alerts can be a lot of different things. We're especially interested in self-harm because that's the most immediate of all the things that could be happening on that Chromebook. So we'll receive the alerts, and during the school day, we'll call the school and have the school address the issue, and in the evenings and on weekends, it's who's ever on call from our team of 8 people, and we'll call the family and address the issue with the family. If we can't, then we'll work with law enforcement to get somebody over there. But this is, I would say, very time-consuming, but also extremely critical. You cannot have Chromebooks like we have out there without those Chromebooks being monitored. Parents are ever grateful when we call, and we make phone calls probably on a daily basis to parents, and we see something that about a student wanting to harm themselves or talking about self-harm. I don't think we've made a phone call yet where a parent hasn't been grateful. And we make these phone calls at odd hours, midnight, 1 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and they're grateful. And they answer their phone too, which surprises me more and more because I know I don't answer my phone every time it rings. But you can see that the self-harm alerts, 829, this is since April, 307 follow-ups with 30 of those students referred to for an assessment. And just the other day, we had a student that placed something on a Chromebook. I couldn't get a hold of them right away. We had law enforcement go out, and that student was ID'd and taken to the hospital for suicidal ideation. So every time that happens, it's worth it to our team that we have somebody identified that may be having some serious emotional issues. So, questions about Chromebook monitoring?
Incredible the time you put into this, you and your team, and that's wonderful that you do. Is there a charge from Lightspeed?
Yeah, it's a subscription that we have with them. There's a contract we have with them for the filtering and for the monitoring part. They monitor, they sift through them before we sift through them, and if it's really urgent, they will call. They'll call Detective Rediger, I think is the first, I call him Detective Rediger. Detective tonight, I guess. They'll call him first, and then I think there's a tree that they call down. And if it's that critical, typically it's an alert, then a high alert, and then a phone call. We We don't like them to go very far, more than a few minutes before we're making that phone call. And it could be a little bit of adrenaline rush as you're trying to find that student's number and making that phone call. And but we usually have somebody either on the road to that student's home, the law enforcement piece of that, or we are talking to a parent. And then we put it in that parent's hand and to parent that child. But we'll help them in any way that we can.
You know, there's cases where you've actually helped save a life.
Yes, undoubtedly. No, zero doubt in my mind. We have probably more than one. Yep. Yep. And in fact, we just had a case the other day that there's no doubt in my mind that it was probably a life-saving event. So, yeah. Should I do something?
Caitlin, do you have anything that tells how well the volume is on stream online?
On this, currently, actually, I'm directly connected to all of the microphones, so I do have access to that, so everyone should be able to hear it.
Okay, because people have complained to me in the past that they could not hear the speakers.
I actually-
want to make sure they're hearing all this, because it's important information.
Yes, I actually work with Doug Miller when I started serving in this capacity, and he helped me with a $9 piece from Apple. It makes all the difference.
Okay, good.
I went to the expert.
I think we may need to page that another now.
Yeah, go ahead and keep going there.
Okay.
Work it out.
All right, well, this kind of segues into the next part, which was to talk about our crisis assessments. And when I talk about crisis, I'm talking about students that are having strong feelings of suicidal ideation. Sometimes these are kids with homicidal ideations, far fewer of those, but we have had a few this year. These crisis assessments, as I mentioned earlier, referrals can be made by a student, by a peer, by a parent, by a teacher. And the school counselor will meet with the student directly, one-on-one, and work through Columbia's suicide screening rating scale with them, and they'll answer a series of questions that at the end puts them at low, moderate, or high risk. We have a partnership with Valley Professionals Community Health Center. They have worked with us to provide a therapist to do assessments during the day for those students that are high risk. Other students may be referred to Hamilton Center, to Harsha Behavioral Center, outpatient clinic, or if they see a therapist in town, they may go see their therapist for further assessment. But so far this year, we've had upwards of 230 suicide assessments done in the school. If we get this going, I have a graphic to show you. In February, we had 28, and mind you, we were on e-learning for 4-ish days. We're out for President's Day, so, and it's a short month, and we had 28 referrals. There you go. November was a busy month, and December, for only being in school for 2.5 weeks, 36 is quite a bit. These numbers continue to be high. Our students continue to experience mental health distress, but our counselors are doing a fantastic job working with them. And these cover students K to 12. So these are students in all grade levels that we have been meeting with. Yep.
What would be normal for a population? I mean, if you say these numbers are really high, what would you look at and be like, obviously we don't want any, but I mean, what would be
Sure.
normal distribution of the population?
So, yeah, when I think of year, our numbers started to climb a little bit. In the past, when I looked back at old data, I came up with about 175 for a school year. So to be at 230 at the end of February might give us a little reference. I don't really know what our average was the last few years that I've been in this position to really kind of track this data. We've really worked hard to kind of stay in the know of what's going on with these students. We do have some students that we see multiple times. Oftentimes, these students will get connected to school-based therapy. So they'll have a provider that meets with them in the school as kind of follow-up. Some students come back to school with a safety plan, just meaning it's a plan for us to keep them safe and under proper supervision. Some students are connected with therapy. Some students are hospitalized. So we work with the parents and we make sure that their needs are met when they return, and that they're set up for success when they come back into the school. If you go to the next slide. This just kind of shows the breakdown by the risk level. You can see 46% of the referrals we've had this year are high risk. So we've had quite a few, followed by the moderate. Low risk. If you want to do the next one. The next one is more by grade level. You can see our high school and our middle school students do take up the bulk. About 65% of our crisis assessments come from students in grades 6 through 10. They're all hovering at about an average of 30 for each of those grade levels. So, but we do have them in elementary. I don't want to pretend that we don't.
Do you have that broken down male to female?
You know, I don't.
It's probably, I would assume it's pretty even really, but I just.
Yeah, I wouldn't suspect there'd be a huge difference one way or the other. I mostly track it by school, risk level, grade level, but hadn't really looked at it by gender.
Going back to Mrs. Moore, to your question about historical data, I know at one point in time when I first started in this capacity, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, over 300 one year. That's what I've heard. Now, I've never seen that number, but that's what I've heard. Since Dr. Kirk has come on board here, I think we keep pretty good data on things, historical data, maybe not as well. So hard to know, but we have seen an increase in the number, that's for sure. That November number that you saw up there always coincides with holidays, where we have more crisis assessments. So, other questions concerning crisis assessments before we move on to VCS reporting?
I just had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I was in a situation with my youngest son. He had a friend contact him, he was very upset, and came to me with it. If that were to happen again, how would you want a parent to reach out, and what's the best way to give that reporting to someone that could help the student?
Well, I think if it's, and I'll let Dr. Kirk chime in here, but I think if it's an emergency, I think you just want to call law enforcement. If you think somebody is, absolutely, it's a critical report, but something that you think can wait, emailing that principal, counselor would be a good way to do it. Email myself, Dr. Kirk. I mean, we monitor things pretty closely, so I think we'd be able to find out, but law enforcement probably the best way to go. If you think somebody's life or if they're gonna,
I was able to, I knew a teacher, and they reached out and they shared with me, once you report, I can't report back to you, and I said, that's fine. But I was also able to reach out to the parent, but I just didn't know that we're in a situation for a parent not knowing what to do in that situation. It worked out well, but just in case.
So when you contact the law enforcement, is that the same as a well child check?
Yes and no. It just depends. Essentially, probably the same thing. And so with Linespeed, for example, our Chromebook monitoring, you know, if we can't get a hold of a parent, then we're going to try to get a hold of them really quickly. We're not waiting for them to call us back. We'll call dispatch and call law enforcement to go out, and they've been fantastic. I will tell you, they are just incredible at their response and dispatch, and everybody's been great. But you know, we'll get them on their way, and I may text a parent or one member of our team, and they'll call us back if they didn't answer their phone the first time. But same thing initially, yeah. And probably those well child checks have increased tremendously over the years, but we used them way back when.
I did.
Yeah, I remember that.
Dr. Pete, I don't want to lock into anxiety or anything, but with the Lightspeed, do you actually get location information such that, so, I mean, obviously you have the student's home address, but spring break's coming up and someone's traveled an area, they took their Chromebook with them and they're connecting, but they're not at their house.
Yeah, so we don't
Okay.
get the location, but you know, we have contact information, and hopefully that parent is able to get a hold of their child. We always like to have that parent put their eyes, or whoever the adult is that is with that child, to put their eyes on that kid. And you know, as I'm calling, or a member of our team, we're pretty adamant about that, to the case of, hey, my kid's asleep, I don't care, get them up. You know, they were just on that Chromebook, we want to talk to them, we want to hear their voice, make sure they're okay. But yeah, new anxiety, I don't know if you're going to come up with a new one for me, but.
I'm concerned about that as well.
Yeah, it is, but we don't get location services, but I don't think we've come up at this point one that we can't track down and contact, but I will tell you, it would be an anxiety-ridden evening if we couldn't find the child. So for the most part, we're able to locate them. DCS reporting, as you all know, we are required by law to report any changes. If anybody suspects abuse or neglect, we're required to report. And, you know, some of the law has changed over the past couple of years, and I think that's been well canvassed in board meetings. But you know, I think our school corporation does a tremendous job with reporting DCS. In fact, among the districts in the area in Indiana, I think we're at the top of reporting, and I think that's because our people report. Our staff just do an amazing job caring for our kids and making those reports. We know that, you know, you're going to call and sometimes things are going to be screened out. That's okay. Some things are going to be screened in, but the bottom line is once you call, it's in the hands of DCS, and we'll be more than happy to assist them in any investigation that we can. But all those, that's another thing that we did, is we placed the DCS icon on every Chromebook for every staff member. So we made it very simple for everyone to report abuse and neglect. We want, when the phone call is made, to be followed up with that report, and that's something we want to happen 100% of the time, because when the report comes in, it comes into Dr. Kirk and Mr. Brenninger back there. It goes to DCS, of course, they made the phone call, but when they do the report, it comes into our offices. And Mr. Brenninger and Dr. Kirk screen every one of them for us. And so Dr. Kirk will send them to me and say, what do you think about this one? You know, this one we may need to follow up on the school side of things. We're, I believe, very thorough about those DCS investigations. And we have a tremendous relationship with DCS. The two supervisors that are associated with the local chapter of DCS are very responsive to us. They're great. But this is about keeping kids safe. And we know that more than half of the reports that are made are screened in. That means they're going to be investigated. And that's important. Questions about DCS reporting? Okay, turn it over to Handle with Care.
So Handle with Care is an initiative that we brought in, been 2 years now. When I first came into this role with Project Aware, I had just been to a conference and listened to some individuals speak about Handle with Care from New Jersey. To my knowledge, there wasn't anything like it in Indiana, and I brought it to Dr. B shortly after I started in this position and said I would really like to take this initiative and start having some conversations with local law enforcement. He gave me the green light, and so we started with our school safety commission meetings, and we presented this idea there to see if we could, what the response would be from some of our local law enforcement, probation, DCS, some of our stakeholders that we work with every day with kids. So Handle with Care is an initiative where when law enforcement go out on a call and there's a child present, they send me an anonymous form indicating what child they worked with. From there, I take that child's name and I notify the school principal simply with an email that says Handle with Care, and I put the child's name. I have no idea what that child went through the night before, but we believe that they were exposed to some form of trauma. Trauma can be defined differently for any individual, but that's not up for us to decide or to investigate what might have happened. It's simply a measure for us to extend extra care and compassion for a child who maybe had a rough night. Maybe they didn't get to sleep, maybe they didn't have dinner, maybe they witnessed mom or dad get arrested. It's just a way for them to communicate with us. We currently are working with the Sheriff's Department and with West Terre Haute Police Department. Again, I have a form, it's anonymous, I have no idea who sends me the alert. I get the name and the birthday of the child, and I take it from there. Just this weekend, I got 5 notifications from incidents within our community. So we've had 126 notifications this school year. Last school year, we had about 95. So it's growing, and we're still in communication with Terre Haute Police Department as well, joining this effort. So we've been really pleased with it. COVID came in right after we launched this, but we still were able to get some of that information from law enforcement so that we can just keep our children safe and we can keep an eye on them when they're in the classroom. So our mental health services, so through Project Aware, the big bulk of this grant is to focus on increasing accessibility to school-based mental health services. These are the partners that we have established relationships with that are coming into our school to provide not only individual and group counseling, but also some individual and group skills training, developing social skills with our students. So we've got providers from all of these groups working at all levels, from our Deming Early Learning Center all the way through our high school programs. We have a variety going on here. Probably, I think the last I calculated was around 450 students are engaged in these services throughout all of our buildings. No, the last piece was just the staff professional development. Again, with the grant, we have focused on increasing some professional development opportunities. This year, we've started with the counselors and the principals, the deans, those individuals that maybe don't need a sub just yet, but we're looking to expand some opportunities, possibly over spring break and in the summer, for our educators to continue some training. Some of those trainings include youth mental health first aid, which I mentioned earlier. We partner with Hamilton Center to provide that training for our staff. We do some suicide prevention training with Team of Mercy. They do question, persuade, refer. They follow that curriculum. And then Susie's Place has also started doing some training with our staff on a program called Darkness to Light, by Darkness to Light. It's called Stewards of Children, and it's recognizing the signs of child sexual abuse. So trying again to raise awareness for staff members to recognize signs of a student being in distress, and the steps to take in order to connect that child to services. So, any questions about those?
So you can see that we have a wide portfolio of different technologies that are strategies that we use to help keep our students safe. And this is mostly, safe on the mental health side of things, but also some physical harm. We have a whole different side of the department that works on physical safety of our schools, which we're also very proud of too. Any questions before we conclude?
What's on the horizon for your department?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think fine tuning, we're really at the birth of this Chromebook monitoring system. I think fine tuning that with, if it's Linespeed or another company out there, that they all work off of AI systems, artificial intelligence systems, and we're really employing that. I think a system that has a really good one would be great, because oftentimes they catch a lot of keywords that don't necessarily, it's kind of a false report that we can get. I think working on that and really just stepping up our awareness of suicide prevention, I think would also be extremely important at this point in time. It's such a huge issue out there, and it's just part of keeping kids safe. So I would say probably the Chromebook aspect, Dr. Haley.
So, given the unfortunate circumstances of some teacher turnover and new ones coming out, teacher education programs are being hired in, and it's hard to keep doing the same training year over year over year necessarily. Are there ways to work with teacher prep programs to try to do things in those programs so that you're getting new teachers coming out with some of these skills?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea. Hopefully a lot of that is baked in that cake at that level where they're talking about DCS reporting or things like that, but I'd be more than happy to go to any college or university to talk about this. So I think it would be helpful for them to come out current in this type of knowledge, especially with Chromebooks. It's a game changer in so many different ways.
And I don't want to think of ways to expand your work on into, but what happens in the summers with the Chromebooks?
They are monitored, the
So
students
the kid
keep them,
is going to keep them? Okay.
and they're monitored 24/7 in the summer also,
The high success rate of return of the Chromebook.
with a high success rate of return of the Chromebooks.
Inside joke.
At that point, do you have location services?
No, still not, but,
Still no 5x0?
yep. Any other questions? I know we appreciate the opportunity to come out and present to you this evening. And if you have any questions, just email Dr. Kirk.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Debbie.
guys.
Well, our future meeting is a business meeting on Monday, March 21st at 6 o'clock here. Is there anything else from the board members?
Did we have a discussion about consideration of a grant or something that for
did have somebody ask me a question today. I think it's probably a pretty easy request, but, you know, we often have people sign in, but if somebody hasn't been to one of our meetings in a long time, previously we didn't have a sign in, and so maybe if they come late or something, they just go ahead and they come on in. Would it be gracious of us to say, if you didn't sign in, you still could if you came in late, because I just think, you know, the increase of people and people, like I said, that, you know, came, I think it was, when we had so many speakers during said, it's when we implemented that. So, I know there were a couple people that came up to me and told me that they didn't know about that. Pretty much, I think, the last 3 or 4 business meetings we've had.
I think you can have them sign in, and then right before you get ready to take public comment, for those of you who did not have an opportunity.
Yes, yes.
Because Catherine's station right there, they have to come through that.
Like putting a
corridor.
sign there or something,
Yeah,
so
mine,
they know why she's stationed there.
yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
Do we need a motion for adjournment? Do we have a motion?